It took us 5 years to get there, 5 years to understand what was going on, 5 years of crisis, of one that problem after another. Every birthday, every event, every action, every school day was just one torture after another. And of course, being ourselves, we thought the problem was the child. We have to fix the child. Don't fix the child. And it had actually gotten to the point where we were actually in court and child court, and the judge was really contemplating whether to even take the children away. And that's when it really hit us. And parents often wonder, well, why can't my child work at school? Well, when they're in a dysregulated mode, they're not even able to learn. They're worried about their safety. And it's just a normal emotional state.
Welcome, Sober on Purpose family. One of the things that has really come to the fruition as we're talking with Gabor Mate, even Mel Robbins talks about it, is trauma and childhood trauma and how that affects us as adults, how this affects us as we raise our children. So I have Scotty Aemis here. He has some incredible resources for us about child trauma, and he has an exceptional backstory. And what, Scotty, what I was getting ready to tell you, and I thought we'll just save it for on air, is a lot of the women I work with come to me and say they're not worried about themselves. They're like, what is this addiction? Whatever the addiction of choice is, what is this going to do to my kids? What's going to happen to them? What's happening in my house right now is not acceptable, and I don't know how to deal with it. So this isn't necessarily coming from the kids. It's often coming from the partner. But the other piece of that story, when they talk about their partner, they will say, my husband, my partner had enormous childhood trauma.
Right. And generational trauma.
Yes. And then as that is coming out, as they're raising kids, especially when they hit that preteen, it starts to show up. Yes. So tell us a little bit more about your work, how you got here, and we'll just have a very informative conversation because I know you've got so much to share with us.
Great. Well, I'll start real quick with the story, and then we can get into a little bit of some of the details and what we've learned and some of the advice that I've can share and with other parents going through it or other caregivers and friends that might be going through it. So specifically, my experience came from when my wife and I, we adopted a couple of kids from a baby home in Russia and brought them home and just assumed that because we were happy and joyful and loving them, that everything was going to be peachy keen and wonderful, and they would be so appreciative and would all grow and la-di-da-di-da, the whole bit. And we came to the hard understanding that that isn't the way it works. But nobody told us that there was anything about trauma. They just told us, oh, there'll be some issues here. There might be some ADHD. There might be some autism. We got to be aware of these things. We treat symptoms. But no one really talked about the underlying issues of trauma. And trauma, what I like to express, is really a brain injury. No different than if you broke your arm and you need to put a cast around it. A trauma really is a change in the brain chemistry and in the way the brain is put together, so that now when a child is reviewed or thinks about something, it goes right to its reptilian brain, right to its amygdala. And I know you know all those things, as opposed, and that's the fear or flight mode, and they get stuck in that mode instead of trying to get up to their high brain or the prefrontal cortex, which is where we can think and talk and that. But it took us 5 years to get there, 5 years to understand what was going on, 5 years of crisis, of one that problem after another. Every birthday, every event, every action, every school day was just one torture after another. And of course, being ourselves, we thought the problem was the child. We have to fix the child, but you don't fix the child. So it all came to fruition basically when we had, and I'm sure many states have a similar program, but a child services that we were constantly called because of all the therapists that come in the house, and they're all mandated reporters, and they're all making phone calls to these people, and they're on a first name basis with us by this time, by a few years in.
A place that you're not really sure you want to have a first name basis with.
That is so. I mean, pretty soon they're just calling me up. Hey, Scotty, I'm calling you again. So, and it had actually gotten to the point where we were actually in court and child court, and the judge was really contemplating whether to even take the children away. And that's when it really hit us and really dawned on me that something different. We had to do something differently, that the path we were on wasn't working. Everything that we were taught about raising kids had to change, and we didn't know what. And it just so happened right after that event, and she gave us time, the judge gave us time to think about it and look at it, and do we really want to go down this path? Just happened to run into some friends of mine. Actually, they were a pastor and his wife who adopted kids, and she was a therapist. And she said, well, you are aware of trauma, right?
And your little antenna went up and went, wait, they didn't tell us something here.
Yeah. What's trauma? What do you mean by trauma? He said, trauma is the underlying cause of all this. And they had adopted kids from Korea and went through a lot of it. And that opened up everything for us in terms, she gave us a direction of where to go, where to research, where to understand, where to learn, where to talk to people, what groups to connect with. And from that point on, everything changed. And we learned that it really is almost an upside down type of way of parenting. No longer are we trying to be the enforcement. No longer are we trying to be in charge, and our children have to pay attention to us or they're not good children. Now it's all relationship based. You mentioned a couple of therapists earlier. The one we followed and connect with is a guy named Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry is a pretty world famous neurosurgeon, neuroscientist as well. Just wrote a book a couple of years ago with Oprah, specifically around trauma, and he's developed a whole program about relationships, and that relationships are the key to healing. And one of the key messages that I tell parents is that, and I just mentioned a little bit, you're not going to fix your child. You can't go on with that attitude.
Do you want to say that one more time?
You cannot fix your child.
Can I back you up just a couple pages?
Sure.
And give us what so people, trauma is being thrown around all over the place, and big T trauma, little t trauma. Give us the simplest definition you can of trauma, especially childhood trauma.
From my perspective, answering that question, I would answer it in terms of, because a child's belief and trust in their caregivers has been broken, and that could have been from neglect, abuse, psychological, could have even been from kids not having consistent meals. Because that trust barrier has been broken, they no longer are willing to believe and follow their guide. So therefore, they're trying to make all decisions themselves. The brain then reacts by putting them into dysregulated, and that's a term we use a lot in child trauma. When a child gets dysregulated state, which is really the fight or flight state, meaning that they're living out of their amygdala, and every reaction is going to be emotional based on, am I safe or am I not safe?
So let's pause right here. So the child is trying to do what it cannot do because it doesn't have the skills yet. That person does not have the skills yet.
Correct.
So they're either going to shut down or light up.
Yes, very well put. And we put it all around. So what do you do? What would happen if that happened to us? If we were if we had created a similar situation, how do we handle it? We might think, oh, well, we'll just logically think our way through it. The child at that state, it can't logically think their way through it. And they're not at a point where they're going to trust their caregiver at this point. So
we might also ask for help. But if when you ask for help, you've either been punished or ignored or abused or neglected, it's all up to me.
Yes. And then everywhere you go, you get re-traumatized as a child. So you never get out of that state. And so, for example, I'll just give this short examples. Yeah. My son, every time he was on the bus, every time he got off the bus, every time he was going to school, every time he was in the lunch category or in some of the classrooms, these were all situations where he was getting re-traumatized. There wasn't an adult, there wasn't anybody creating safety for him. And so And parents often wonder, well, why can't my child work at school? Well, when they're in a dysregulated mode, they're not even able to learn. They're worried about their safety. And it's just a normal emotional state that they're in.
So the basic thing about dysregulation, we've been trying to pick this apart for several podcasts now, but the basic thing of dysregulation is I don't feel safe, which means
Correct.
I need to be, this is another big word, I need to be hypervigilant. So in the sense of I'm looking around for where the danger is going to come from or where I'm going to need to protect myself. Is that?
That's well put. I know hypervigilant is the term that many people are using as well as now, because that's a good description of how they're living their lives. And so, for example, I think you and many of your listeners probably have heard of the 3 R's, right? The regulation, relationship, reason. So when a child is dysregulated, we as parents and caregivers want to immediately talk to them and tell them what they're doing right or wrong. But first, before they ever get anywhere, we have to get them dysregulated. We have to get them, we have to get them regulated. We have to calm them down. We have to be under control. Then the next step, before we talk to them about what's right or wrong, we have to build that relationship. Yeah. Once they have that relationship and they have that trust, then they're willing to listen to reason. They're willing to say, hey, what did I do wrong? How can I do better?
Oh, man, you really have to slow down to speed up, right?
Yes,
really slow it down. So what, Scotty, did you do with your children when you learned, when you began to understand what was going on?
So, for example, we just happen to be fortunate enough in our area, and I hope hopefully in many of your listeners' areas, there's schools. I'm wearing a vest of a school in our area outside of Philadelphia called Lakeside, and they're a trauma-specific school. Wow. I was able to get my kids into that school, and they have a completely different environment. They teach, it's all the same regulations in terms of education, but they do it in a trauma-informed way. They're all smaller classes. All the teachers know each child personally. As they come in the door, each child is greeted by name and with a touch on the shoulder to let them know that they're safe and they're okay. They can choose where they want to sit in the room, and they can have a relationship with that teacher. They will undoubtedly oftentimes get dysregulated. Do they get in trouble? Nope. They go to a special room where they can calm down, relax, and then go back to the classroom. They don't have homework. They get all the work done during the day. They have that. Therefore, they have accomplishments. They have goals. They have things that they can earn as they go through it. But it's important they don't have consequences, good or bad, because when you have trauma, consequences don't work.
All right, so you got to now stop. You got to stop and unpack that. So good or bad, consequences don't work when you have trauma.
Correct. When a child has trauma.
Because all of us have some trauma. I mean, Mate's take on it is it's not the trauma itself, it's the way you learned to unpack it and process it.
Sure. And so the way I like to put it is in terms of consequences work when there's a trust with the authority, because authority is given. Authoritarianism is a power move, and that just puts the child back into a sense of fear or flight again.
So that's where you create the power struggle, because you see it in parents all the time of you will do this, and the child says, I will not do this. And then you're just locked. Exactly.
But when they get to the point where they trust that caregiver, whether it's the teacher or the parent or the coach or their pastor or their Sunday school teacher, then all of a sudden it's okay. I'll do that. And then oftentimes what comes with that is choices, right? I mean, we all know as parents that what you do is you try to give your kids choices as long as you're giving them those choices. So either one they make is okay, right? So but that gives them empowerment. And you start small. The consequences, timeout. Nope, there's no timeouts in our world. There's time ins. We're all going to sit together for 10 minutes and see if we calm down and build a relationship. And then let's model what we did right or wrong.
Okay, pull up again right there. So instead of, and my guys are 17 and 19, so I did some things incorrectly. Oh. But instead of going, okay, I'm going to isolate you, which did not work for my oldest, just didn't work. I'm going to isolate you. It's more, is it the chair in the room with me, or is it me sitting next to him with a hand on him or rubbing his shoulder? What's the big change? Because, you know, it's kind of this grandparent thing. We went from corporal punishment, spanking, and then in my generation, it was more, when I was a kid, that timeout function, which carried into love and logic, which we use with my kiddo, made him a great negotiator, let me tell you. But now you're saying even the isolation is not where they need to be.
They don't. It could, because everything is relationship.
Okay.
All growth, all healing comes from relationship, and relationship comes from safety. Once they feel safe, they can learn to be attached. If they can get attached, then the relationship builds, and then they can slowly but surely the brain will change, and they can begin to work out of the higher brain areas, the prefrontal cortex. That's the goal. The end goal is to change the way the brain is configuring.
Okay, that gives me a broader context. Yeah, from the back to the front.
Yeah.
So you've got this school that, okay, the kid is, what if the teacher has 10 kids that are losing it all at once? Because I know, you know, kids react to each other. How do they manage that?
Sure, it's never easy. You know, they have a special room that the kids can go to. Usually you don't have 10. Usually one is setting off another one and whatnot. And if one goes out of the room, another one or two go out of the room and go down to a special room where they can calm down and talk to somebody and maybe use some of their coping skills to calm down and figure out what they can do until they're regulated again. And then they come back in the room, and there's no penalty. They just get back on, start working again, and move on as if that's just normal part of the day. There's no blaming. There's no finger pointing. There's no yelling. There's no screaming. There's none of that. So
it's kind of like, this is good. This may seem like an odd. It's kind of like in a sports competition of, I didn't make the basket. Okay, I can't focus on not making the basket because the game is still going. So I need to immediately switch over and get back in the game, because if I spend time on, the consequences get higher if I spend time on, I didn't make the basket, woe is me, woe is me. Right. So the
only thing I would add to that is, if I had a coach who, if I missed the basket, I thought he was going to yell at me, tell me I was bad, and sit me on the bench, I would be thinking about it constantly. But if I had a coach that said, get in there and fight and get back on the defense and work hard.
Yeah, shake it off. Let's go.
And then I say, I trust that guy. I believe in my coach. I'll work harder. That's what you want.
Where were you this morning when my 17-year-old and I were having a little consequences tiff?
I was with my 17-year-old. I had one of them.
I'm sure you did yours better. So you talked to this pastor, and his wife was a therapist. How have you brought God into this? How have you, because oftentimes, unfortunately, we may grow up with that understanding that this is an angry God, a punishing God, a God that's going to harm me rather than care for me, especially if our earthly experience has been that way.
Well, what I share with other people is a couple of things, that no matter where you are, whether it's a school, whether it's your church, whether it's your Boy Scouts or Girls, well, Scouts is boys and girls, whether it's your music, whether it's whatever event is, you have to be able to present it in a place where your child is safe. And therefore, with kids with trauma, they have to understand what that means. What does safe mean for a child with trauma? And so they have to be informed. They have to understand what it is, and they have to understand the relationship. And so we actually changed our church, and from one church, which was fine, to this church, because it just so happened, because it was that pastor and his wife who had that experience, that was throughout the church. So all of a sudden, our kids felt very safe in the Sunday school, because the Sunday school teachers understood it, because the pastors understood it, and it went throughout the thing. So first choice was understanding what the right environment for our kids was, and without picking one church, without saying one is good or one is bad, it was just the right environment for our kids. Secondly, I use a line that I think is very important for anybody who's raising kids with trauma, and that's, the value of your love is not dependent on your child's response. I like to say it. The
Say
value
that
of your
one
love,
more time. Let's really get that in there.
the value of your love is not dependent on your child's response. Because if we don't, we feel like they're not acting properly, that something's wrong with them, that we're upset, that hurt our ego. And then I relate that to what God has said. God has adopted all of us into his family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're all adopted into God. And none of us have earned the right to go to heaven.
Nope.
So if none of us have earned the right to go to heaven, what's the difference between how we act to God and how a child who was dysregulated has acted to us? And God hasn't said penalized us. God is constantly forgiving us, offering that opportunity. And he's asking us, just like as Jesus said, it's love your God, but love your neighbor. And it's all wrapped up into one. Our neighbor is our kids,
Mm-hmm.
is our neighbors, is our neighbors' kids, is the other person's family, the single mom or the family who just has some triple kids. How do you share it with them? How do you take care of them? How do you give them value as well? So that's what I like to say. And so wherever we go, we want to create that environment of safety and positive relationships, and that's given to us from the Bible and Jesus.
So let me throw you one that has just really crossed my mind of, okay, you have a parent that has unhealed trauma.
Yes.
The child has had some trauma. Everybody's doing the best they can, but they're all being teenagers rather than the adult being the adult.
Yes.
What do you do for the adult? How do you, I know you guys run some programs and things like that. How do you help, like you said in the beginning, the parent who is pointing at the kid going, it's their problem, say,
Yes.
no, really, you're dysregulated, which is dysregulating the kiddo, which is dysregulating the whole environment.
Right. And it really comes down to kind of an awareness thing. It really is about developing that relationship with that parent and understanding that it's beyond that. It's not, first of all, we like to always say, number one, grace. Every one of us is going through a ton of things. Right. And whether you're a young family or you're a single mom, single dad, whatever, there's a lot of difficult going on in your life and challenges and things like that. So the first thing we say is, no one's been pointing a finger. We've all been there, and we're here to help and support and offer grace. That's number one. Then the second thing is that because all growth is built on safety and positive relationships, we have to be able to offer that. We have to. I mean, within the Christian world, as you know, a lot of adult trauma comes from lack of self-love, lack of not feeling like you're cared for, that you're on your own. That has to be offered as well, whether they're believers or not. They have to feel a sense of that safety, that care, that lack of judgment. People always feel judged, right? Like your kid is acting out, and things like that. So that's the first step before anything else, is establishing that relationship.
And like, our family has been called out by social services. I know how that feels. I was hoping you would get around there. So love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's what I find with a lot of women I work with, is they're so busy taking care of everybody else, they've forgotten that they need to love themselves, and that comes from God himself, and then it flows out that direction.
That's beautiful. Yes.
Scotty, this is really great stuff. Tell us about the work you do, the book you've got out, and where people can find you.
Sure. I also want to add one other important thing for because we have this tendency to always want to get our kids into the latest program and the latest doctors this and maybe some of the meds, and to help them. And I just want to reinforce the fact that with trauma, it's not how many great things you can do, it's how many bad things you can eliminate. So
so that's eliminating the 80%. It's saying, all right, we're going to eliminate this. Just this, it happened to me this morning. That's why we got into it, is I got in a rush. And I get in a rush and I get snappy. So eliminating that, the extra things, eliminating that rush would decrease their response, which decreases their anxiousness. I don't know if it was a trauma response this morning or not, mine or his, but it was the rush that caused it. If I eliminated that, we wouldn't have had it at all.
And for our kids, for example, I mean, I think we're unique, but I had a 5-year-old who got kicked off the bus permanently, a school bus. I had someone kick off a 5-year-old off a bus, right?
Yeah.
But we earned it. We did it because that was a consistent problem every single time. So basically, we were just sending our kid off into pure heck out there by putting him on that bus. And we have to be aware of all those situations, not only in terms of how we're dealing with life, but in all the situations we're putting them in. And if they're getting re-traumatized, they're not going to grow. They're not going to heal. And healing from trauma might take a decade, might take 20 years, but it's going to be based around reducing all those negative stimuli and having it in a safe, positive area. Sometimes boring. Sometimes we cut out birthdays and we cut out family dinners and we're going to just have to do it because that's safe for them, because there's not all these stimuli going on where they're going to shoot off and see what they can get and see who they can triangulate to get the latest thing they can get from one caregiver or another. So it really is a lot about that too.
I'm sitting here listening to you snapping some things in place going, this is so at 15, my oldest said, I can't do church anymore. And we said, okay, social anxiety, we get it. So we didn't do that. But then at 17, he said, I can't do family dinners anymore. We said, we get it. You know, when you can show up, show up. So all these things are kind of snapping into place. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if we did the right thing or the wrong thing. We did something different than how we were raised. How we were raised was you will show up at church. You will show up at family dinner. So we did come into a shift. Did we make it safe? I don't know. You and I might have to do some work together.
we'll work. You know, we just need to talk more about. People need to talk about. Is he avoiding it because he doesn't want to? Because he wants to sit back and watch movies and play video games, or does he want to do it because it creates too much anxiety and he needs to have a coping skill? So
I think it was both. Really both.
So maybe he can create an environment saying, you know, I had a situation with my son where. And a lot of people go through this. He didn't want to take a shower. He didn't want to take a shower no matter what. Yeah. So so my natural reaction is, you will take a shower.
Yes, I'm turning on the water.
Right. But through this process, we said, okay, tell you what, you tell me what is right, because your situation is you're going to be with your classmates. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. How about if not every day, what will you tell me? And he came up with a solution of, well, I can do it every other night.
Okay. That's us getting out of our own way, right? It's their body at that age. It's their body. It's their responsibility. And their classmates are going to be like, woo-hoo, we can't be around you anymore. That's too much.
That's right. But they get empowered. And that's just a small example of whether they have trauma or not. A lot of kids don't like to take showers. I realize that. But empowering them, builds up resilience. As they build resilience, all of a sudden they're able to handle more situations and more difficult situations, and they don't go into a trauma response. They can deal with it. They can have a coping skill, and they can move to a more of a reasoned response. And for example, both my kids now went back to the regular public high school, and they're maintaining a schedule in high school, and both going into 12th grade, and even looking to hopefully go to college. At least they say. Not that they're studying much. But
what a blessing. What a blessing. So Scotty, tell us where we can find you.
So I have a website called childtraumasherpa.com or CT Sherpa. People are welcome. There's lots of different blogs if people want to read through them. We even have an on-call therapist if people want to talk to someone for a question or chat. We have I put together a little book that we did on Amazon. Where we go from here, which is all about that. And but I want to say I don't do any of this for profit. There's no cost. There's a cost to the book. That's the Amazon cost. It's like $3 or something like that. Nice. But I just wrote it, and believe it or not, it went #1 in 8 different categories. Not that, and I'm not a writer. It's just that I know there's a demand and there's a need out there. Right. And if we can tap into that need and build an environment where people understand what to do next and how do we help and whatnot. You know, I'm on I know you were in a little bit of a rush, but our local school district, I'm on a group with the special education group to help counsel and I give ideas. Typically, every school district in the nation is somewhere between 15 and 20% of the families are on IEPs or 504s.
That's us.
That's a huge number. And yet no one's talking about how to resolve trauma in the public schools. And so
I see a speaker circuit in your future. Get these kiddos raised and off you go. Scotty, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have you back to talk more about this. And I really appreciate your time today.
And it's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
You, beloved listener, are creative, resourceful, and whole. Do you want to add more purpose to your sober journey? Do you want to make room for the new and make your dreams a reality? Apply today for a dream session. Go to tanyajoya.com. That's TANYAGIOIA.com and apply today. Let's get you dreaming about your new purpose.